Late August 1939 unfolds with a particular quiet, the kind that settles over rail stations before dawn and lingers in the courtyards of foreign ministries after the last light is dimmed. Rumors move faster than trains. Clerks keep their voices low. Doors that once stood ajar close a little earlier each evening. The capitals in question appear far apart on a map, yet their calendars begin to align in ways that feel deliberate. Speeches emphasize caution and order, but the phrasing may be studied, the pauses planned, as if every word is a placeholder for something not yet public. In this account, we reconstruct a plausible chain of events drawn from open historical references, published archives, and widely cited records. What follows remains a speculative narrative shaped by available sources and the era's public documentation, not a definitive statement of fact. Dates and places anchor the story, but certainty is limited to what was recorded, reported, or inferred by observers at the time. The atmosphere is practical rather than dramatic. Couriers may carry routine packets that happen to arrive at opportune hours. Schedules may shift by minutes and appear meaningful only in retrospect. The stated purpose of any meeting could be narrow, yet the surrounding context suggests a larger horizon. Our aim is to trace a believable path through that tense week, to listen for the signals hidden inside ordinary phrasing, and to note where official and unofficial accounts seem to overlap. The point is not to deliver a final verdict. It is to follow the pattern of caution and convenience as it appears, step by step, across a Europe that holds its breath and waits for signatures to dry. The rhythm of late August 1939 rests on small, observable motions that may carry greater weight than their scale suggests. And it begins with a corridor that smells faintly of tobacco and floor polish, where a clerk in a dark jacket waits for an arrival that has been anticipated but not announced in wide circles. The city outside keeps to its habits, yet by mid-afternoon the traffic seems more deliberate, and the faces in the ministry compound show the restraint of people who understand that less said is safer. Visitors present themselves with simple cases and sparse retinues, traveling light to avoid notice. Their movements are practical, the clothing subdued, the greetings trimmed to essential courtesies. A reception room offers tea served at a steady pace that encourages listening rather than talk. The public line remains unremarkable. Routine contact, general assurances, a shared interest in predictability. Still, there is a tempo to these visits, a sequence that seems arranged to reduce gaps as if every departure leaves a space that the next arrival quickly fills. A foreign ministry communique appears that evening with measured phrasing about constructive exchanges and a respectful tone toward counterparts, and it is read in cafes with a mixture of relief and unease. The relief stems from the idea that contact is better than silence. The unease from the sense that such language often precedes a change of course. The next day's schedule resembles the last, yet observers notice a light increase in courier traffic around the building's rear entrance, an area commonly used for material too modest to warrant a front door display. Weather is noted because weather affects timing, and timing may affect outcomes. A late summer heat settles over the city and shortens tempers, so meetings end a little earlier, which creates room for another brief exchange somewhere else. Attention focuses less on who speaks and more on who waits in the adjacent room. If intervals are short, the risk of interruption falls and the document on the table moves forward without a dramatic scene. In these rooms, chairs are arranged in known patterns and notepads sit square to the table's edge, an old habit that suggests the conversation should travel neat lines. The tone remains courteous, the key points lifted without ornament, and the framing is defensive rather than expansive, as if the actors prefer to secure their flanks while the season still holds. An aide consults a diary in small script. Lunch is delayed. A telephone rings with the patient cadence used for internal calls. It may be coincidence that the message arrives just as a senior official stands, but in such weeks, coincidence and design begin to share a border. Guests step out to a side office, return with calm expressions, and request an additional hour the next morning to resolve a minor phrasing issue. The phrasing likely concerns scope and distance, concepts that can be described in neutral terms, yet applied with precision when the time comes. A sheet of paper is folded twice and placed under a blotter, a move that signals a pause while preserving momentum. In the evening, a reporter notes that an official car leaves the compound by a less traveled route, which could simply be an effort to avoid crowding at the main gate. A reasonable explanation often fits facts. Yet over time, a set of reasonable explanations can form a pattern of intent. The city sleeps poorly, and rail timetables printed for the week show slight adjustments that make early connections easier, a detail of ordinary logistics that may serve a larger schedule. Nothing irreversible has occurred, not yet. The week is still a week of visits and polite phrasing, and the document that matters is not final, though its outline grows firmer with each routine exchange. Ayasnya menjelang hari berikutnya, perhatian bergeser ke meja tempat daftar periksa sudah menunggu. From the same building where courtesies set the tone, focus moves to a smaller room with a long table and a neat array of pencils aligned beside thin rulers, a setting built for careful reading rather than display, where the light falls in a steady rectangle that keeps shadows to the room's edge and reduces distraction, while maps and notes are compared against phrases that favor calm over flourish. The publicly stated goal is straightforward, an understanding that reduces risk by promising non-interference. Yet inside this room, the practical questions are narrower and less visible. Who stands where if the season shifts? What counts as proximity? How far a reassurance may extend without binding hands when the calendar advances from late August to early September? The room's attendants work in an orderly sequence, giving the impression that every item has a place and every page has a number, making it easier to close the folder if the door opens unexpectedly. A senior visitor reviews a line of text and marks a small tick that could mean approval or a note to return. The phrasing avoids bright signals. Instead, it uses terms that fit a dozen contexts and only become distinct when matched to a known street or rail junction. Because the language is ordinary, it travels safely through corridors. Yet because it is ordinary, it can hold more than one reading, and that is the property most valued in weeks like this. Two indicators appear in the record without fanfare: a clipped press bulletin citing cordial progress, and a set of meeting notes copied in a clear but spare hand, likely prepared for those who were not present but will need to affirm what was agreed. The maps on the table are not rare, yet the order in which they are consulted may show intention. A northern sheet lies atop a central one, and an eastern sheet remains close at hand, as if the reader wishes to move through connected spaces without losing the thread. The conversation proceeds at a measured pace that keeps tempers cool and discourages sudden claims. Food arrives in plain dishes chosen to minimize interruption, and glasses are refilled with care that denies any festive mood. The wording of the public text moves toward completion, and everyone understands it must stand alone, a clear document with no visible tail. What follows is memory, inference, and the habit of states working in private to reduce surprise. Couriers cluster near a side staircase that keeps them out of the main hall, another small sign that the bulk of the work concerns timing and sequence rather than theater. Outside, shoppers collect necessities without naming a cause, and station platforms see more uniforms that claim to be en route to routine duties, which is accurate in its own way, as routine duties increase when uncertainty grows. A senior aide flips a map and makes a faint mark that could be a crease. Not a line, but every crease advertises a preference, and even preferences can become coordinates when combined with the needs of a calendar. Night arrives with a calm that feels arranged, and a draft text sits on the table with blanks for signatures and dates. A carriage clock marks the hour without insistence. When the visitors depart, the room is restored to its earlier order, as if the staff wishes to erase signs that anything large has passed this way. The press bulletin printed that night cites a productive exchange and a shared hope for stability, a term that reads as reassurance to most readers and as room to maneuver for those who weigh language by habit. The clerk who files the meeting notes performs the task with the same care used last spring, yet the drawer chosen sits higher than usual, a position that allows quicker return when the next morning demands it. The lines on paper remain lines, and paper does not speak, but paper waits, and those who place the papers where they now sit intend to retrieve them before the month turns. Isyarat itu berlanjut ke kantor penerima tamu, di mana penyambutan resmi mengambil peran berikutnya. The evening of agreement arrives with a formality that seems designed to quiet doubts by repetition of habit, and it opens in a reception hall where the arrangement of chairs follows a familiar pattern that places senior figures within easy sight of the door and gives supporting staff a clear path to the sideboard, the kind of layout that keeps movement smooth and conversations bounded. A table offers modest refreshments, enough to signal respect without tipping into celebration, and the timing is careful so that speeches do not invite questions and the clock does not invite speculation about why the hour has drifted. The phrasing shared with the public is lean and tidy, a pledge of non-aggression and a mutual preference for order, a document that favors straightforward verbs and leaves color to the newspapers. Photographers record a narrow set of moments that show handshakes and neutral expressions. The selection reduces ambiguity while carefully steering clear of exuberance. The air in the room holds a trace of starch and tobacco, and the light carries the faint hum that comes from fixtures that have been asked to burn late several nights in a row. Two signs of the moment stand out to those who keep lists: an official communique released to the press just before the hour, and a brief entry in an internal agenda that notes evening reception concluded, which may be prosaic, yet places a marker in a ledger that others will consult when calendars are reconstructed. The atmosphere is described as cordial, and it likely is, but it is also taut, the way a rope feels when pulled just enough to hold weight without shaking. Speakers emphasize the practical nature of the understanding while avoiding any claim that this is new ground. The effect suggests continuity with traditions of statecraft that all parties can acknowledge without surrendering their own narratives. Servants collect glasses with quiet efficiency, and the room empties not all at once, but in a sequence that avoids congestion at the doors. Outside, vehicles depart along routes chosen to limit crossings, a small courtesy to those who prefer not to be seen leaving at the same moment. Those not invited to the reception notice changes of tempo in the streets, lights that remain on a little longer, windows that close a little earlier, a pause at the curb before the final turn. The public document is read in newsrooms with an eye for the unstated, because the plainness of the text feels deliberate, and deliberate plainness often rests atop details that cannot be squeezed into sentences without drawing attention. A file clerk who handled a draft earlier in the day watches the clock and notes that it has kept true time all week, a comfort of mechanics amid shifting speech. The visitors retire with courtesy, and the hosts remain a few minutes more, closing folders and returning pens to their cases, a gesture that may feel minor, yet signals that the night's work has concluded and tomorrow's work has not yet begun. The reception does not run to midnight. It finishes earlier by design, allowing rest, signaling confidence that nothing requires urgent repair. The hour after a signing can be the quietest hour of a year, not because tension vanishes, but because the form has been satisfied and the next steps have already been discussed in rooms where the curtains were drawn in the afternoon. In the districts that watch such things, station masters observe that certain tracks will be clear at first light. The implication remains within the boundaries of routine operations, yet routine can serve many ends when timetables are flexible and explanations are brief. The night settles, records are stored in their assigned places, and the corridor that carried careful visits now holds only the fading smell of polish and paper. Dari ruang sebelumnya, fokus berpindah ke kantor logistik dan ruang peta tetangga saat catatan terakhir disalin untuk tahap selanjutnya. The work after the reception begins before dawn, when building staff open narrow windows to settle the night's stale air and lay out a smaller stack of folders whose corners have been nicked for fast sorting. Because speed now matters more than ceremony, and the margins on certain pages carry pencil marks that pair locations with approximate windows of time. The public document has already served its purpose of order and reassurance, yet the practical layer proceeds under the calmer phrasing of routine administration, where a courier's errand looks like a supply inquiry and a rail request reads like a seasonal adjustment, which is both true and incomplete in a city that prefers business-like calm while decisions move along the shortest paths. The first indicator arrives in the shape of a posted rail circular that amends several through services by modest minutes, an adjustment that appears designed to smooth bottlenecks near key junctions and to stagger departures just enough to reduce notice, because a straight line attracts attention, while a gentle curve lies quiet inside a timetable. The second indicator appears as a short internal memorandum that lists meeting times over the next 2 days using neutral subject lines and spare verbs, the kind copied cleanly so that every subsequent reader can tick boxes without adding interpretive notes. Clerks understand the tone and adopt it, speaking in brief sentences that avoid descriptive flourishes, and they file papers high in cabinets where the arm reaches without effort, which saves seconds when a change arrives by telephone. Outside the building, traffic holds normal patterns, but delivery carts travel a little earlier and linger a little longer, which allows certain parcels to pass without haste and without an audience on the main steps. Maps that were folded after the evening reception now rest flat under shallow weights, and the earlier creases form faint ridges that guide the eye from one district to the next. Here a river crossing. There are crossroads that carries more significance at dawn than it does in the afternoon. In nearby offices, the phrasing of instructions is stripped to a few nouns and verbs because clarity without color is valued now, and alignment across desks matters more than flourish in a speech. The city's morning papers print the non-aggression language and place it beside commentary that praises stability while declining to speculate about secondary meanings, a choice that keeps readers steady at breakfast and avoids driving crowds toward official buildings. That steadiness is useful, as vehicles can then use backstreets that are less watched, with drivers trained to choose the shadow of taller blocks and to pause where the road widens to let another pass without forcing a halt. Staff who manage ledgers write the day's entries in the same hand they used last month. Yet the columns now include a modest extra line for check numbers that correspond to temporary movements, a quiet device that aids reconciliation without creating a new form. A messenger leaves with a case containing 3 thin files whose titles could denote routine transport issues. The titles are factual and true to their content, but within the sheets, the order of tasks creates a path that runs cleanly from dispatch to receipt, and that path will be walked within the week if clocks hold their pace. The atmosphere inside the ministry remains composed, a habit worn by officials who learned long ago that composure is a tool, not a mood, and who therefore lower their voices as the day warms and allow silence to stretch over the table, while a date is checked against a schedule pinned behind a door. Doors remain important, particularly those that open inward toward rooms where a chair has been positioned to face a wall map that carries only small pins near river bends and rail spurs, pins that can be removed quickly if a visitor is announced without notice. A discrete file labeled with a prosaic subject receives 2 inserts that share a common number, and the number travels later to a ledger where it will appear innocent among entries for repairs and seasonal maintenance. The quiet operations of these hours rely on steady habits that do not require fresh training and therefore invite no attention, which is the whole point in weeks when the stated aim is predictability and the unstated aim is room to maneuver once the month turns. When the sun reaches the height that warms the stone pavement, a short list of contingencies is repeated by a senior aide in a voice that allows no confusion about sequence, and those who hear it nod in the practiced manner of staff who have carried out similar sequences under other names and other calendars. Lunch arrives in shallow bowls and is taken quickly, Because work must press forward during the brightest hours, while casual eyes are most likely to drift away from ministerial courtyards toward the river and the markets. Late in the day, 2 telegrams are acknowledged in the registry with clipped entries that cite confirmation of reception without comment on content, a careful method that registers contact without supplying narrative, leaving narrative to those who prefer the sound of their own speculation. As evening comes, the city's lamps flare in the slow sequence that always begins in the business quarter and concludes near the station, and windows in the ministry dim one at a time until only the map room shows a steady square of light, where a final copy of the day's schedule is initialed and placed atop a folder whose corners have become slightly rounded by handling. From the corridor that first carried careful visits, attention now crosses into an adjacent planning room, where the next day's agenda waits with ruler straight lines and a column for notes that will be filled in a tight hand before the clock strikes noon. The week advances by recognizable increments as clerks settle into a cadence that favors short exchanges and consistent forms, and the couriers who serve both ministry and railway offices keep to familiar routes that look ordinary even when they carry instructions that touch more than one district and anticipate movement along roads that take on new importance when nights arrive sooner, near the end of August. The public language remains calm and measured, a careful pattern of statements about order and mutual restraint, and this language performs well in cafes where conversations lean toward groceries, rent, and the price of coal, a focus that helps officials complete work while the streets maintain the rhythm of a city not yet in crisis. Inside the building, lists of names are checked against lists of roles, with substitutions recorded in small script to reflect transfers that will be explained later as practical reallocations. The truth of practicality holds because every bureau has finite hands and priorities shift when a calendar is under pressure. The first indicator of the day appears in a plain entry on a station master's daily sheet, received by the ministry as a matter of course, which notes a block of early morning wagons reserved for general service and records a preferred order of arrival that places heavier loads toward the middle, an arrangement that any student of traffic would endorse because it reduces strain on a line that may see repeated use. The second indicator is a clipped notice of a press briefing scheduled at a steady hour 2 days ahead, a choice that seems intended to calm speculation by tying public updates to a dependable routine and to dissuade rumors that flourish when silence expands to fill a whole evening. In rooms that host working tables, the construction of instructions favors direct nouns and low numerals that pair to stations, turns, and bridges, not to units or titles that attract immediate attention. This jargon of geography is common in civil work and helps mask any single intention inside a field of ordinary needs. Aides who manage ledgers now keep one column for the visible ledger and another in a notebook that summarizes the same figures by row count, a harmless cross-check that happens to allow swift reconciliation if new entries must be added before sunset. Doors open quietly to admit a liaison from a neighboring department with a fold-out schedule that shows sensible improvements to road maintenance near 2 crossings where carts can be delayed by ruts after a rain. And this maintenance plan, though civic on its surface, provides a secondary benefit in smoothing routes that may see heavier than usual traffic if the month turns in a certain way. The day's memoranda borrow sentences from older documents to maintain an appearance of continuity, and such borrowing is practical because it reduces error and discourages curiosity, since repetitions are less interesting than innovations in rules. A small group gathers to compare a marked map with a list of depots that can shift stock between them without new paperwork, because prior approvals exist for seasonal balancing habits that every district follows when harvests do not land evenly. The usefulness of old approvals is that they answer questions before they are asked and allow hands to move without new signatures that might raise eyebrows. Across the river, a telephone exchange logs a call that begins with a routine inquiry about temporary accommodation for traveling, Staff and ends with a request to confirm access hours. At a rear gate that few use except for maintenance carts. Access hours matter when timing matters. And timing matters now because the plan expects trains to arrive in rooms of air and minutes rather than in stories about intention. In the afternoon, a brief meeting between two senior figures results in a single line added to a monthly operational sheet that reads like an efficiency improvement and behaves like one, for it arranges a pattern of arrivals that reduces queuing at 2 points and therefore reduces notice from those who watch lines to guess at plans. The discipline that animates these offices was learned over decades and does not require rehearsal. It expresses itself in posture, in the careful angle of a folder upon a desk, in the choice to strike out a word rather than tear a page because torn pages invite questions, while a line through a word creates an audit trail that satisfies any later reader who values neat processes. Toward evening, the staff take care to confirm that the next day's set of documents will be ready to travel in pairs so that a delay on one route does not halt progress on another, a habit that feels like prudence and tends to look like efficiency whenever inspected by auditors. A senior aide locks a drawer, places the key in a jacket pocket, and writes the date in a notebook that has recorded such dates in a gentle sequence since spring. A visual line that tells a story of steady progress without stating its object. The hour grows late, but not very late, because even complex work benefits from rest when the tasks depend on quiet hands and clear eyes at dawn. The room is straightened to its earlier order, the lists are clipped back into their folders, and the blinds are lowered to the height that gently occludes the street, while allowing a view of the sky for gauging weather at first light. Menjelang pagi berikutnya, perhatian bergeser ke meja tempat daftar periksa sudah menunggu dengan 3 kolom yang menuntun langkah-langkah yang kini mendekati pelaksanaan di lapangan. The formal language remains on the front page, clear and spare, while the narrower language of offices continues its work along lines that appear unremarkable to most readers and entirely expected to the few who watch bridges. Timetables and the spacing of convoys at dawn. Signatures have dried, but the ink on the smaller sheets is still new. And those sheets carry the season forward one day at a time, allowing arrangements to stand without daring a claim of permanence. Our account stays within the borders of the month, and within the edges of what can be seen or reasonably inferred from public statements, posted schedules, and the routine forms that acquire weight when stacked in careful order. Some notes are copied. Others are returned to drawers that close with a practiced push. Clerks in both capitals file their papers using familiar systems that avoid attention and sustain the impression of administration rather than design. This impression may be true and it may be enough. Yet the routes marked on maps suggest readiness of a practical sort, and readiness often echoes louder than speeches when nights shorten and decisions draw near. What matters next may not be announced from a podium. It may appear as a pause at a junction, a cleared siding, or a change to a daily sheet that would look ordinary in any other year. If the arrangement holds through the turn of the month, the regularity itself could invite new moves. If it strains, the very same regularity may make the strain visible. Which path will pages record when the next ledger closes? And what will a station master write in the margin the morning after a line opens that was quiet the day before? The days that follow take on a firmer shape, and the relationship between simple public phrasing and practical preparation becomes visible to anyone who watches stations. Telegraph counters and the arches of bridges where carts tend to pause when loads are heavy. Because movement under guarded language always leaves marks in places where schedules meet terrain. Officials continue to speak in steady sentences about non-aggression and predictability, sentences that land well in the morning papers and help households manage their routines. Yet, within the quiet of ministries, the order of tasks now follows a clean list that reduces gaps and limits the number of calls required to place a request in motion. The first indicator appears in a field report that reaches the registry at mid-morning and notes that certain crossings have been cleared. of debris and that a secondary road has been packed too. Reduce wheel sink in light rain, a civic improvement that likely improves harvest transport and certainly improves the passage of heavier wagons. The second indicator is an agenda note that advances a coordination meeting by 2 hours while narrowing attendance to a smaller set, a change that will not trouble outside observers, but that allows the main table to close, its work before the noon bell, and to release instructions to staff, who will not have to navigate crowded corridors later in the day. Inside the map room, the pins used to track simple logistics now migrate in small arcs that mirror the intent of the week. Not a grand arrow drawn across a continent, but a sequence of tested connections tightened by habit, with an understanding that once such connections hold, other decisions become simpler and less visible. Clerks who prepare packets for the late train include a second copy for the early train, in case the night produces delays that could ripple into the morning, because contingencies written as neutral efficiencies often become the backbone of action when hours grow short. The language of documents continues to avoid classifications that would attract a headline. It instead favors lists of places and times, the rivers to be crossed, the sidings to be kept clear, the bridges to be inspected by specified days, and the reporting intervals that fit a district's standard rhythm. This simplicity shields content while raising overall tempo, as no energy is spent translating code between departments, and no new forms must be taught to staff who already know where to sign and where to initial. In the districts beyond the capital, the observed pattern is one of early starts, longer pauses at mid-morning, and comings and goings aligned with freight windows declared 2 days earlier. Taken one by one, these facts look like sensible adjustments to seasonal needs, and taken together, they mark a path that someone has traced on a map under a sheet of clean glass. Notices to the press continue on schedule and emphasize restraint. They also leave room for readers to conclude that the season may pass in order, which is a conclusion useful for quiet roads and on-time trains. Couriers do not travel in pairs anymore, as pairs draw eyes. They now move as single figures who look like any office runner in any year. In quiet intervals, a senior official reviews a column of numbers that show capacity, not because capacity will be met today, but because the knowing of capacity helps decisions remain narrow and reversible, an attitude that suits an arrangement built on convenience. By late afternoon, the day's tasks have reduced to confirmations that arrive by wire and are logged with 2 initials in the registry, an economy of stroke that signals a preference for brevity while implying the presence of longer instructions elsewhere. Bridges and roads hold steady under their loads, and guards posted at junctions have, according to the field report, adopted a more regular rotation that suggests comfort with their duties and clarity in their brief. The hour of dusk brings a small acceleration in city sounds that soon fades, and lamps show their regular pattern, first in business streets, then along the avenues that lead toward stations, finally in the residential lanes. A last check of the evening reveals that the drawer holding the day's inbound notes is lighter than the drawer holding outbound copies, a condition that indicates forward movement, even if described as routine correspondence. The map room door closes, the cover cloth is placed over the table, and the line of pins ends where a river bends twice before joining the main flow, a place known to anyone who has studied maps of the region, and quiet enough that few would notice a handful of late wagons taking the outer road. From the planning room, the focus now moves toward the rail yards at first light, where the ledger hands will match entries to wagons, and where the next sheet of instructions will be checked against an agenda stamped with the EE date that appears on the public document already printed in yesterday's papers.